Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Stone Ridge Connect. Thank you for joining us today. We're very excited to be here to present to you the path to the cloud, migrating your full IT ecosystem. We know we've spoke lots today about what's next for GP, Business Central, and all the different options for how to move. But for many of you, we want to zoom out and look at your bigger infrastructure because if you're moving ERP, chances are you've got some other stuff on-prem. So that's what we're here to talk to you about today. So many of you may know me. My name is Nikki Willer, and I'm a Senior Client Success Manager. I have been with the Stone Ridge team for about 18 months now, but I have over 7 years of experience in technology consulting, client management, and also strategic support. I'm very passionate about making sure our clients get what they need through thoughtful discussion, tailored solutions, and long-term partnerships. And I have extensive experience across the Microsoft stack. So not just the dynamic side of things, my interest extends to Azure, M365, and really looking at the full suite of solutions to drive digital transformation and innovation.
And hi, everyone. My name is Tyler Allard. I'm a solutions architect on our cloud services team. That means I get to work with everything M365 and Azure related here at Stone Ridge Software. I've been here for nearly 2 years and most recently helping with the Copilot team. I have about 10 years of experience in the industry with 7 years of that focused on modern work and security. As for what we're going to be talking to you about today, first, we'll just do a high-level summary of on-prem infrastructure versus cloud infrastructure. To relate that information to a contextual example, we'll walk through an on-prem file server versus a cloud solution. And then when it comes to moving those workloads to the cloud, Nikki and I will walk you through how we build a roadmap and then the steps involved in actioning that roadmap being assess, plan, migrate, and optimize, and then talk to you a little bit about how Stone Ridge can help you with that move.
Thanks, Tyler. Okay, so let's talk about the on-prem reality and the fact that it is not just GP. So for those of you that are still using GP and hosting it on a physical server, chances are you've got more than just that sitting on premise. The reality of the situation is you likely have file servers for the storage and management of files, network shares, access to files across networks, local printers connected directly to your local network, SQL servers or database management systems, applications that are tailored directly to your business specific needs, maybe they're custom apps, and also VPN and Active Directory for secure remote access and user management. So for many of our GP clients, this is the familiar landscape. They don't have everything in the cloud yet. And while these systems have worked and do work and have worked for you for many years, they obviously come with a lot of cost, complexity, and limitations as well. And over time, these pain points can start to add up and feel a little bit like technical debt. You've got maintenance on your physical servers, you've got hardware failures, maybe access issues, and different kinds of security risks as well. Not to mention, any of this can break at any moment, and costing a new server is a large upfront expense. So when we're talking about the general IT infrastructure, we really want to make sure we're taking a holistic view and not just looking at GP on the server, but looking at your full IT environment.
And as we're looking at moving that environment to the cloud, it's important to think about the solutions that are hosted in the cloud that are identical to what you already have on premises. Microsoft's solution stack is pretty comprehensive, where it has similar solutions for almost everything you'd have on-prem. But I say similar intentionally because they're not exactly the same. And this gives us a really fun opportunity to assess how you're using those on-prem pieces of your infrastructure or applications and try to find solutions that not only work for you, but actually add some value as you migrate to the cloud. Some examples we have on the slide here are like for your on-premise Exchange, there's the direct one-to-one relationship for Exchange Online, where a lot of the functionality is the same, but now your mailboxes are hosted in the cloud. And there's some fun advantages to that, where we now have cloud-to-cloud backups, we have data loss prevention, and we have contextual awareness for searches online when you're looking for sensitive information in your staff's emails. Another identical solution would be from local Active Directory up to Entra ID, formerly known as Azure AD. This is one of those solutions that might be a little bit more different. For example, if you're using local Active Directory, odds are high that you're using group policy, and there is no group policy with Entra ID. However, there's a series of other solutions that achieve the same functionality, including Microsoft Intune for mobile device management. One such example that we'd like to dive a little bit deeper into is the file server on-prem versus SharePoint Online and OneDrive for Business. If we look at the on-prem file server, we know that it needs to be sitting on on-premise hardware, which can be expensive to purchase and also a little bit more expensive to maintain. If we're looking at the file shares on-prem, the permissions associated with that can also be complex. We have file level permissions, we have folder level permissions, and then remote access permissions exist entirely outside of that configuration as well. And then in order to access those files, users need to be either on the local network or, more often than not, connect to a VPN for that remote access. And if we look at taking those same files and hosting them in SharePoint Online, not only do we get the real-time collaboration where multiple users can be working on the same document at once, we also have version history. So if you're working with someone on a file and they make a change you don't necessarily agree with, you can roll that back pretty easily, whether you're working with them on the file at that time or not. As far as the costs are concerned, it's scalable and predictable. With SharePoint Online, 90% of the time that cost is already included in your M365 licensing. So once the files are up there, there's no additional cost. The sharing, whether that be external or internal, while you have a litany of control options for access control and who can share what and who has access to what, it's all really controlled by the Entra ID or M365 security panel, which means that it's one single pane of glass to manage access. You know exactly what people are going to be able to see. You can control what information is shared externally and internally. And that actually scales up to the permissions that you set at the tenant level. And then the final point here, once information is in the cloud, users can access it from anywhere. Of course, you can set parameters around that. Do they need to be using a corporate machine to access it? Do they need to be in a specific geolocation? All of that is at your fingertips, but it's a lot lower barrier to entry to getting to those files than a VPN application needing to be installed on that machine.
Yeah, and just to add to what you're saying there, Tyler, with SharePoint and OneDrive, you're really not just storing files like you are in this physical server setting. You're enabling collaboration, mobility, modern workflows. It's a totally different way of working. And just to call out, of course, further to Tyler's point there, that security isn't a compromise in this setting. Microsoft obviously invests heavily in things like data protection, like Tyler mentioned, and you can apply the same, but typically better, more granular policies in the cloud.
That's a great point. Thanks, Nikki. And as we're talking about all these changes and how SharePoint is better, you're probably thinking, well, that sounds very different and could create a lot of friction when it comes to adoption or adopting these tools. What we really want to iterate here is that we try to meet you and your team where you're at. We have found ways to deliver these cloud solutions to be nearly identical, even if the backend isn't identical for the end user experience. What we have on the slide here is two pictures of file shares, one being an on-premise shared drive, one that's hosted in a server that's mapped via the network to a user's workstation, probably something that almost everybody on the call is familiar with. And on the right, what we have is SharePoint Online and OneDrive for Business. And you can see in the panel on the left-hand side of the File Explorer window, they're both line items. The end user experience is identical. Whether a user is clicking on that shared drive or they're clicking on that SharePoint Online sync directory, it takes them to a folder structure that they're familiar with. They can browse the folders, they can find the files, they can open the file and edit them and work with them directly on their workstation, whether it be a Word document, an Excel document, a PowerPoint presentation. That functionality for the end user is exactly the same. But the difference for your organization is that these files are now hosted in the cloud. And even if they're synced locally to end user workstations, you can still have multiple people working on that file at the same time. All of those synergy advantages that you get from having something hosted in the cloud and remotely available to your staff are consistent, but it's not changing how your users are working too much. And again, this is just one example of how Microsoft and Stoneridge are trying to design these solutions to meet you and your team where they're at.
It's a great point, Tyler. We get lots of questions about the environment looking the same and different. So it's great to see that comparison of how to make it friendly for our users. So moving on to building out your roadmap. So it's strategic, not overwhelming, is the approach that we suggest taking. So a successful cloud migration starts with clarity and strategy, not just taking what you have and lifting and shifting it directly into the cloud. So for that reason, we recommend the approach shown here of assess, plan, migrate, and then optimize your environment. So these four phases ensure you account for technical, business, and user needs at every stage of your migration. And you're not thinking of this as just an overnight move. You're thinking of it as a smart progression, which has high impact, low risk wins to start with, and looking to modernize your business applications and your processes as you go along through a kind of holistic point of view. So we will walk through each of these phases now.
So of course, the first place we need to start is with your current state. Like I said before, we meet you where you're at and we assess all of your on-prem systems, regardless of what you're trying to migrate, whether that be GP to GP hosted in the cloud or GP to BC or some other such solution. We want to look at everything else that you have on-prem so we can really take advantage of that migration to the cloud and that cloud first mindset, if that's what your organization is looking for. The first thing we'll do is we'll try to inventory all of your on-premise systems, depending on the scope of engagement, right? There's a diminishing returns on how long we can search for, but everything that your team uses on a regular basis, we'll be able to identify. Also working with your teams to identify how they work with these tools. Like I said, the cloud solutions are not exactly the same, but they're similar. So understanding your team, how they're using these tools and why they're using those tools goes a long way in creating smart, bespoke solutions that they're going to want to adopt in the cloud. We identify cloud compatible services. And what that means is we look for applications that you might have purchased in the past that you have hosted on-prem, and we can try to find cloud hosted solutions, oftentimes from that same provider. Adobe Photoshop is a prime example where you might have legacy licensing for a product on-prem. Now they have a cloud-based solution. If you're getting rid of your on-premise infrastructure, it might make sense to move to that cloud-hosted solution. Of course, when we talk about moving things to the cloud, there's that licensing, compliance, and security conversation that needs to happen. We will assess everything that you're currently using so that we can appropriately scope what those changes look like to you and your team, whether that be a SaaS solution license, whether it be compliance changes. We might need to make sure we're hosting the data in a region-specific cloud. And then the primary point here is when we have all that information, we meet with you and your team to share the information that we found, make sure that it aligns with what you're expecting. If there's any challenges, then we work through that as a team to identify why it might be that way. And once we've all agreed that this is where your organization is at the beginning, we can start to plan on how to move these things. An important thing to mention here is that while Stoneridge is a cloud organization, that doesn't necessarily mean that we're trying to push you too hard to go full cloud. There might be some use cases for having a hybrid or multi-cloud solution. What we do with all the information that we found in the assess phase is we try to find a workload that works best for you and your organization. It might make sense to keep some workloads on-prem in a hybrid situation and then move the rest of it to the cloud. If you have a new server, for example, or if you're using CAD software that's pretty resource intensive, that might be something that we want to keep on-prem. Once we've identified the workloads that you want to move up, we'll essentially triage where the easy wins are. File shares, email, things like that that users might already be using that are identical to their on-prem instance when they're moved to the cloud. That's what we'll move first, try to garner some goodwill with the staff and really lower that barrier to adoption. As we're building that roadmap, we're also thinking about dependencies between applications or even between users and applications. When we're thinking about migrating email or file shares, we're going to want to make sure that any executive assistants are moved with the executives that we're working with. For example, we want to maintain that relationship so that users' roles are able to be completed functionally with the tools that you are paying to adopt. When we are able to identify all those dependencies and we identify the workloads that we're going to move, we create that change management plan and we all agree on it together. And then we also build that training plan and we set that user acceptance criteria so we all know what success looks like. And then once we've measured thrice, it is time for us to cut once, where we execute our migration. We love to take a phased approach. We'll identify those use cases that we did in the migration plan, and we'll find key users that we can migrate to really test the product and test the migration process to ensure we're not negatively impacting anybody too much. And once we have that happy, successful adoption, we're able to scale it out to the rest of the team. Of course, as I mentioned before, we are really end user adoption focused. So we will prioritize end user support, as well as through the M365 dashboard, we have the M365 adoption metrics that we can review with you or your team members to see if your team is adopting the way we expected. And if there's any challenges to adoption, we can identify those and action them on a case-by-case basis. Once we've confirmed that your team are using the new tools, they aren't having to go back for any legacy information or any legacy functionality, that's where we can start to optimize by decommissioning that legacy resource that's perhaps incurring additional costs. We can actually reassess how your team is using the cloud infrastructure. For example, we'll spin up virtual machines for your team to use, and if they're only using them from noon to 5 p.m., then we might be able to, have those machines offline for the rest of the day so that you're not incurring charges for those machines. Once we have everybody up there, we're also able to confirm the security configuration is performing as expected through the litany of reporting options that are available via Entra ID, and just ensure that it is in line with what your expectations are.
Thank you, Tyler. That was lots and lots of information on the technical side of things. And we know it can be a little bit overwhelming, especially you've got your core business, your core job that you engage in. So we want to talk a little bit about how we at Stoneridge can help. We have over 300 GP clients, many of which at different stages of their journey. Some of them are already transitioning, and many of them may know us as at its core a Dynamics partner. But I'm here to tell you that we are really an end-to-end Microsoft partner for across the full Microsoft ecosystem for Azure, Dynamics 365, M365, Power Platform, and of course Copilot, which I'm sure you're hearing lots about today at Stoneridge Connect. So as a core Microsoft partner, certified Microsoft solutions partner, we have designations in certain practice and technology areas that give us access to funding on behalf of our clients. So this is not something that all partners have access to. This is specific to our partnership and technical expertise amongst Microsoft technologies. And with that funding, we're able to provide, in some cases, a little more upfront support along the way to support you in this path to the cloud and journey to the cloud, depending on where you're at. So that's kind of enabled by our senior solution architects we have in M365, Business Central, of course, Azure, SharePoint, and the Power Platform. So specific resources that are focused on those technology areas. And it really goes hand in hand with our end user experience focused approach, which Tyler spoke a little bit about earlier. So for example, his side-by-side example of the way a network drive looks instead of a SharePoint or a OneDrive and how similar they can look is really just an example of how we're trying to take that lens of looking at it from your end users perspective of how these technology changes may be impacting them if they're used to doing something one way for 20 odd years. So that experience has really been built up with the many migrations we've completed successfully, more than 30 cloud migrations across of all different sorts, be it GP to Azure, GP to Business Central, maybe moving clients from a file server to SharePoint Online and OneDrive. We've had many engagements supporting clients along the way. And we do have Microsoft licensing and funding experts. Specifically, their full-time job is just to understand Microsoft licensing and funding, and they're amazing at what they do. So all these different pieces kind of add up to enable us to provide more intelligent, thoughtful support to you on your path to the cloud journey. And how we've been doing that is our Stoneridge path to the cloud process. So we may even have some clients on the line today who have gone through this process with us. But essentially, this is aimed at our clients that are currently on-prem, looking at moving some or all of their IT environment infrastructure to the cloud, but would like a little bit more engagement and hand-holding in that process to kind of review and get some tailored recommendations. So what we do is start with an initial technology review meeting where we meet just to understand your priorities, your timeline, your budgetary restrictions and current infrastructure, and determine whether or not you're eligible for any Microsoft funding on the front end. So this is a great opportunity for us to understand, are you looking to go to Business Central in a year, or do you need a little bit more time and maybe you want to host that in the cloud because your server is out of warranty, for example. So in this first meeting, we kind of level set to understand where you're at, which helps us determine what sort of experts we need to pull into subsequent meetings. So the next phase of the process is obviously to go and seek out that Microsoft funding so that we can have our experts spend some time with you on some tailored discovery. So for you as our client, this is very limited effort. You click accept on a couple of Microsoft emails, and at the end of the process, you submit some surveys just to show that you have that we completed and engaged with you. And then we'll go ahead and schedule some detailed discovery meetings. So as I mentioned, the tech review kind of determines who we include in these, but typically Business Central and M365 solution architect at a minimum. And here we really review your IT environment and look into what your desired future state is. Perhaps you want to include more inventory management or warehouse capabilities that you didn't have in your current state. We start to understand what kind of optimization of business processes might be relevant to you and determine what kind of third-party partners you might need to assist. Finally, we move to our analysis and recommendations phase where we take away all the information that we've gathered with you and put together some tailored recommendations based on your needs, as well as provide you with some estimates for high-level migration effort and also ongoing costs when it comes to things like licensing or cloud consumption. So that's kind of a high-level overview of our path to the cloud process. If this sounds interesting to you, it's a no strings attached process. It's here to guide you on your journey. And I think the clients that have gone through this with us have taken a lot of value from the outputs and just kind of documenting where their current state is at. So we would love to hear from you if this is something you're interested in. Feel free to drop it in the chat or reach out to your Stoneridge contact about the path to cloud process today, and we'd be happy to engage with you on that. So I think that is all the slides Tyler and I have. We're so excited to be here with you today, and we're looking forward to supporting you on your path to the cloud journey.
Yes, thank you everybody for coming, and please enjoy the rest of your day at Stoneridge Connect.
Have a great day.